Stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning. Good morning. First on the agenda here. Budget, natural resources management.
Good morning.
Morning.
Review of the budget for, I think we'll start with the Parks and Recreation budget.
And can everybody find that in your binder?
Not real fast.
It's in the back section. It is on page, what's the department number, Jeff? 150? Page 52 in the budget worksheet.
So I know when I took a look at this, the original budget report that I got from Kay showed $170,000 in revenues from the tax forfeited properties, and then $50,000 in fees. And I wasn't exactly sure where she came up with that, so I called her. And what we had done is I had submitted a proposed draft budget for Deep Lake Park, just so you guys would have an idea of expenses and operating budget for that. She incorporated that into this. Well, that is certainly not going to be happening in 2023, so I had her take that back out again. So I'm not sure if you're showing that $50,000 in fees on your budget.
Professional fees?
Nope, it would be just in revenues, under fees, or under the forfeited property.
I took that out.
You did take that
I
out?
did.
Okay, perfect. All right, I just wanted to make sure that we were all looking at the same figures anyway. So the $170,000 in revenues is the apportionment from the tax forfeited account. And that's very similar to what we budgeted, or what we received from this year. So I don't anticipate that there's going to be a huge increase in revenues. And so that budget amount will probably stay the same. Salaries and wages, your normal increases there. There's no changes to staffing levels or anything in that aspect. I am showing under professional and technical services, $50,000, and I'm anticipating that that will mostly be for asbestos and other regulated materials abatement at Deep Lake Park. I know there's a lot of asbestos, and there's some old fuel oil boilers, and there's some buried tanks out there that need to be removed. So I show that in there. Also, if you look down at the miscellaneous expenses, the bottom line, I have $250,000 in there for demolition and deconstruction at Deep Lake Park. Again, we need to move forward on cleaning some of this stuff up out there so we can get that done. Everything else in the budget is pretty much in line with what we did this year. We're not anticipating any new developments. We're not looking at any increases in anything. So pretty much status quo on the rest of the parks. It's just those two line items that are a bit of an issue in that with only $170,000 in income and almost $500,000 in expenses, there's a definite unbalance in the account. So we do have a fund balance that we could work with, but that brings it dangerously low if we ever have any other issues that we need to address. So
Mark, did you, is there potential grants to cover any of the Deep Lake stuff,
for development, there probably is,
but not demo?
but not for demo. I did find a grant, or it's a loan from Department of Economic and Employment, deed, whatever. I found a low-interest loan from that. Not sure if this would qualify for that. So I'm going to explore that a little bit more. But again, that's not a grant, it is a loan. It's 15-year payback. And the county would have to bond for it. So,
We can't move forward with development until the demo is done.
I would think that we would at least have to get an RFP and get a scope for the development or for the demolition in 2023. So at least some portion of that $50,000 is gonna be important. And of course, we need to do the demolition or securing of the space before we can make it available to the public by trails or just, you know, even unimproved at some point, having it accessible to the public is not possible until that building is secured or demoed.
right, and we are getting a lot of requests for people to access the property, to go down and fish on the lake, to walk in the woods, go back down and see it. And of course, with those buildings down there, we just don't want people out there. There's just too much of a liability.
Do you have the road blocked off?
Pardon?
Do you have the road blocked?
Yes, all the roads are gated. So, you know, there's that. There was something else I was gonna talk about. The second application for designation has been submitted to the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission. That, they should be making a judgment on that by the end of this month. So we will know if we may get, you know, that high rating and would then be classified as a regional park, which would open up all those funding sources for development. I don't know if there's a limit to the number of times you can apply, but, you know, we're hoping that our second application will get us that high rating. And then we are prepared to submit our master plan for the park in September. And then they will also score that as well. And a higher score on that certainly gives us a better chance at getting funding through the grants. But until we get that, we're just gonna have to wait. But we still have to get those buildings out of there and get those secured, so.
Now, in the 250,000 for demo, has there been any consideration in perhaps people that want to salvage some of the stuff out of the lodge?
I talked with a company called Better Futures of Minnesota, and they're a company that specializes in deconstruction. They kind of use it as a somewhat similar to STS. It's kind of a training program for incarcerated individuals. Typically what they do, they're out of Minneapolis. Typically what they do is they just, you know, remove appliances, windows, things like that out of houses. They came and they took a look at the site and they were interested, but they said this is a much bigger project than what they normally would deal with. They're not used to three stories and large buildings. So they weren't sure whether they could tackle it or not. They could maybe take out some of the interior wood, but they had no way of handling the large wooden beams that are in there. Typically, when you do a demolition project, the company that does the demolition is always looking at trying to salvage what he can out of it to lower the cost and get some revenue back out of it besides just what the county pays them. So, they're typically would do a lot of the salvage as well. Whether they would actually go through and physically manually take out the boards and just knock everything down and then try and salvage what they could out of there, I don't know. I know the windows in the buildings are all pretty much single pane windows, so there probably is not much value in the windows, although there are those large windows in the front, which probably would be worth something, since they've got to be 6 by 10, 8 by 10, something like that. Very large plate glass windows, so those would be worth something. And of course, the live edge siding and the rough cut wood on the inside is all certainly valuable. That would be worth salvaging. But that's typically figured right in with the cost of the demo.
Well, I know that there's some companies out there, that actually do this for their jobs, is disassemble things like this, to salvage the wood and whatnot. And I would think that perhaps we could get some revenue from that end of it to help offset the $250,000 demo costs.
So Ted, would they take and then do whatever? Or are you thinking that they would salvage it and the county would hold an auction or something like that?
I think it would be more
They would
valuable to
handle
them if they kept it all. I don't know of anybody locally though, but this is something, like I say, and I think the taxpayers would like to see that too. I know that when I viewed it, some of the people on the park board, and I agree with them, think that it would be a shame if all that stuff just got put into a hole and tossed. Because there's not only the history there, that to me is a small part of it, but the value of all that timber and stuff. And who knows what else is there. Because like I say, I don't do it myself, but
A lot of people are putting reclaimed lumber into their homes.
yeah. So like I say, I'm thinking, that was my thought, is you could salvage some of the history, some of the valuable wood and stuff, and maybe we would actually earn some dollars that could help defer the other costs. But I don't know who in the area, how do you send out RFPs for stuff like this? I don't know.
You work with the architect.
Okay.
Could we potentially move this into the capital improvement budget versus, because it's really not an operating?
It really isn't. It's a placeholder at this point in time, and yeah, I would anticipate that we would roll this into a capital projects list.
It would make more sense from the aspect that if we do try to capture some tax capacity, that we would have some capital improvement funds available in the first year to take care of some of this, so it doesn't look like it's under an operating budget.
And we'll discuss some of those ideas is when we dig into the main part of the conversation. So consider these placeholders and know that we're gonna have a lot more conversation, but we need to have a placeholder to know that it's important to do something next year.
Thank you.
All right. If you have any other questions on that, certainly feel free to give me a call, talk to me about it. Moving on to the natural resources, the forfeited lands budget.
Which is on page 94.
So we are looking at roughly at $1.7 million in revenues. Again, not looking at any great increases in revenues from timber values. I think the timber dollars are gonna hold pretty steady, hopefully anyway. Fuel prices seem to have stabilized, come down a little bit, which might entice some loggers into bidding a little bit on the timber sales. Housing starts are down, of course, and we're suffering through a little bit of an inflation and recession. So we're not really sure what the timber market is gonna do, but hopefully it will stay relatively stable. So again, I think our revenues in tax forfeited account will stay fairly stable. As far as personnel costs, I will be turning 65 in next March, and plan on retiring. What I am offering is a phased retirement option, where I would drop down to half-time. County would hire a new land commissioner at, preferably at their starting salary range. I would stay on for as long as the county board wants me to stay on. I've proposed for the entire year, but I would receive no benefits, collect my retirement, and work half-time at my current salary range or wage range, and be there to guide the new land commissioner through the process of getting him acclimated into the finer points in the job, and would free up my time to work a little more on the Deep Lake Park project, and we would not burden a new hire with trying to develop that park at the same time he's trying to learn the land commissioner position. So there is that in the salaries end of the budget. So just be aware of that. Again, that's county board decision, so.
How much did you put in the salaries for that?
Pardon?
How much did you put in the salary budget for that?
It would be, the land commissioner would be at starting range, and I'm not exactly sure where that would be.
So the budgeted amount is in here as well, and we're anticipating $61,000
Additional.
additional.
Thank you.
And we'll go through all those as I mentioned.
Yeah.
I just wanted to recognize Chip and Jerry for their time here this morning.
Right, and then I would drop down to halftime. It can be no more than halftime, so.
Okay, thank you.
And that would perhaps start in April, May?
May. Proposed retirement date is early May. Other than that, again, we're not anticipating any significant items in the agenda or the budget. I think we added we got a couple of new lease vehicles that will be replacing existing vehicles. So that bumps up the vehicle lease payment line item. And then, of course, let me just find it here. That's the wrong one, this one. Interfund transfers out, that is our apportionment amount of $850,000. Again, those are the previous year's dollars. So that's why it shows a $49,000 deficit. It's just that you're spending last year's dollars on those apportionment dollars, the last line item there, the $850,000, so. If you have any questions on that?
Is that like a carryover then from the previous year? Or?
Yeah, what you do is the net proceeds from from this year carry over to next year, and then in March, we apportion those out, so we have to, basically, you're starting the beginning of the year with a zero sum. It's just that it takes until March to get through all the paperwork and figure those out, so.
Is maybe some of this 850,000 gonna be spent, or is appropriated already for something that's happening this year?
Well, we had yeah, we've already done the apportionment for this year. And that again happened, I think, in either March or April. So it's just that you take that ending balance and you portion that out in April. So it kind of shows up in your budget as an expense.
So you saw the $170,000 in revenue in parks. That's 20% of 850. So we're showing as an expense in NRM, paying out what we took in this year, and then the split between the other taxing districts will account for the balance of that 850.
All right, and another portion of that shows up in the forest development account in 71,618 on page 96. That is the $170,000. And that, again, it depends upon whether you can take up to 30% of the net proceeds from the tax forfeit account. We have not taken that full 30% over the last several years, just because the forest development account has roughly around $1 million in it. And that's where the county board kind of wanted that budget, that account to stay. So we've just been taking 20% of the net proceeds, and that's about what we spend every year. So we're just trying to maintain that $1 million balance. So we don't take it all, and that leaves more for apportionment back to the general fund, the school districts and the townships, so. If you look at the forest development account, again, not a whole lot. Contracted purchased services, the $25,000, that is a amount that we pay to the survey crew, the survey department, for work that they do for us throughout the year. So that's just that we just do that every year, and we certainly get our money's worth out of them because we have them doing a lot of survey work for us, identifying property lines and corners and things like that, so.
I see in, like, last year you had 110,000. So 25 will be adequate to cover for 2023?
Yeah, the 110,000 was, we budgeted for, there was some road work. I think that was that Schoolcraft Trail project that we did. Kind of had to budget out of this account for that as well, so.
Okay. Thank you.
You go on to the County Forest Road Access, Forest Access Road Fund, which is page 97. I split out the revenues that we get in there, and I hadn't done that in 2022, so I split it out. We get two sources of revenue for this. There's an unrefunded gas tax payment that we get from the state twice a year, February and in August. And that is, every time you fill up your tank, and you're paying your state gas tax. And they figure that a certain amount of that gas tax goes to vehicles such as ATVs, snowmobiles, and those kind of things that are not using, the roads. And so they take a portion of that gas tax and give it out to counties and the DNR for maintaining the forest roads, because that's where they think a lot of that, that use gets put. People out ATVing and snowmobiling and stuff. So we get a portion of the gas tax dollars, and that's at $22,000 that we get. The last, I think, 4 years, the legislature has appropriated an additional $1 million to counties for forest road maintenance. And that 26.5 is the portion that Hubbard County receives off of that. So we get a total of about $48,500, and that, we use that for any road improvements and our regular maintenance, grading contracts, brushing contracts, and those kind of things. Typically, we spend pretty much most of that. If not, that fund can build up in case we have a large project again, such as the Schoolcraft Trail project, where we need some significant dollars to work on. So that's that's what those dollars are for. And then the page 98, the payment in lieu of taxes budget. The land department receives a portion of that as well. For the tax forfeited lands, we received right around $88,000. Out of that, we pay our membership dues for Land Commissioners Association, the Forest Resources Partnership, the Tree Improvement Cooperatives, those kind of things. Miscellaneous expenses, if we have any buildings that forfeit that we need to demolish, other than Deep Lake Park, which is not forfeit. This is the funds that we use to do site cleanup, blight cleanup, and those kind of things. So this year we did not have any buildings that we needed to clean up, so we didn't have to. We did budget for that, but you never know. I mean, it's this time of year that we get our forfeiture list, so we don't know until now whether we're going to have any buildings that we need to clean up. So we budget for some cleanup in there. Again, if we don't use it, this is a fund balance that can build up. If we have a large project in the future, such as a gas station that would forfeit, and there's some leaky tanks or something, then we need to do some environmental remediation. This is the fund that we need to have built up for those kind of things. Or if, say, a middle school would go forfeit and we need to tear down the middle school. Some of those things that we just need to think of, some large buildings, projects like that may go forfeit. We need to have some fund balance there in case we need to do some cleanup, blight cleanup on that. That's the natural resources budget. The environmental trust budget fund. This is an account that there is a trust fund that was established back probably in the mid-90s. The state had some lakeshore leases that they wanted to dispose of, but they couldn't sell them directly to the leaseholders, so they did a land exchange with the county, and then the counties sold those lakeshore lots. And the monies that they received from the sale of those lots put into this environmental trust fund, where the county can use the interest that we get off of those funds, but we cannot touch the balance. And Hubbard County has decided to use the interest off of that for our environmental trust fund, and this is basically our ag inspector program. Any weed spraying that we do, any inspections and mapping of invasive species that we do, this is where those funds come from. Granted, there is not a lot of income, or has not been a lot of income, since the interest rates have been so low. that we've actually had, we did used to charge a portion of Greg Hensel's salary off of this account, but since the interest rates have gotten so low, there's just not enough revenue there to even charge a portion of his salary off of this. So his salary comes split between the tax forfeited account and the recreation budget. So those budgets are basically funding his time for working on ag inspector stuff. So again, we don't anticipate much for projects, since there's not much for funding on it. Hopefully with the increase in interest rates that we may get a little bit more on that, out of that fund, but we'll have to see where that goes. So again, not looking at doing much on that as there's not much there to work with, so. And then, supplemental, I gave you a Deep Lake Park operational budget, just a rough guess at what it might cost to run that park for a year. I'm showing $57,800 in reservation fees, and that's assuming that there are 55 sites out there, and that is just a stab at how many sites we may be able to get out there. I'm assuming that there may be about 40 or 20 campground sites on the upper level up by County 4, and there may be probably another 20 down in the lower level. You would have 4 camper cabins and then the 6 pack-in campsites around the lake. Again, guessing at, the camper cabins would bring in much more than the $35 per night that I'm showing. Probably would be in the range of $100, $120 a night for that. The RV sites would probably be right around that $35, and the pack-in sites would be probably somewhere in that $14, $15 range. Estimating that you would have roughly 150 days from the 1st of May through the end of October for a camping season. And I'm just anticipating that an early occupancy rate would be 20%. If we get to the point where we're like Itasca, their electrical sites, they're booked 92 to 96% of the time. So 20% is kind of low, but this is, just as a early opening before there's been a lot of marketing done. So we anticipate that 20% would be a start. Hopefully that would grow to 50% or more as the park becomes better known. So, and then I did throw in $3,000 for a cross-country ski trail grant. That's an option that we could apply for a grant and aid program and manage to have a ski grant out there, and then maybe pass through those dollars to the local Itasca Tour Club for maintenance on those clubs, on those trails. So salaries and wages, anticipating that you're going to need 1 full-time park attendant out there year-round. That, again, gets a little suspect in the winter months. You're going to need somebody out there because you will have, most likely, your 4 camper cabins will be open year-round and used. And there would be a bathroom facility and shower facility that would need to be maintained and weatherized for year-round camping on that. The park, the shelter, picnic shelter would be enclosed. That would be a kind of a warming shelter for the people that are using the trails out there, kind of a base of operations. That would need to be maintained. There would be snow removal. Hopefully, we can get, the Itasca Tour Club or some other club or volunteers to go out and maintain the actual trails, so we don't need to do that. So whether you need a full-time attendant out there year-round, the winter months might be a little excessive. But definitely during the summer, when there will be 1, 2, 3, 4 shower buildings four shower, three shower buildings and bathrooms, and then the picnic shelter, plus mowing and trimming and cleanup and those kind of things. So I show, at least during the summer, basically 1.5 persons out there full-time.
How did you come up with those salary figures?
That
That
is,
seems pretty low.
It is low.
that is currently what we're paying. That was off of our pay schedule, so.
And you have positions filled at that?
Electricity, there's a shot in the dark there. I have no idea. I called Itasca Mantrap and asked them if they had any clues, and they really didn't know either. And a lot of that is, of course, gonna depend upon, you've got 30 amp sites, you've got 50 amp sites, you've got some people that may not use electricity at all, and what's your occupancy rate? So that basically was a stab in the dark. And of course, at least one bathroom shower facility is going to need to be maintained year-round. So you'll have heat in that, and the picnic, or the enclosed picnic shelter would need to be heated. So you'll have either electrical, propane, whatever you're using for heat in that. Sanitary service, again, not knowing whether we're going to have a dump station or whether we're gonna have individual sewer system, a full sewer system to each of the campsites. Kind of depends upon how you are gonna manage that, but assuming that you're going to need to pump that tank at least once or twice a year. Professional and technical service, just electrical, plumbing, HVAC, whatever else there might be out there, you're gonna need some stuff for that. Building maintenance and those kind of things. And then, of course, if you're gonna have a person out there year-round, you're going to need to have some kind of a vehicle for them to, get around the park, and then this does not include equipment costs that would be required, such as lawnmowers and string trimmers and little utility vehicles for getting stuff around, so. And then cleaning supplies and nuts and bolts and those kind of things. Again, solid waste services, for picking up the recycling and the trash. I'm showing 147,000 roughly for expenses, and then the $61,000 in revenue. So again, not a moneymaker, but depending upon how that the reservation rate goes, that could bump up, and it could be where you could actually get some revenue off of it, but it's gonna have to be about 50% occupancy rate, which I don't anticipate right away, so. Any questions on any of that?
So that budget is not incorporated anywhere in the regular
No,
budgets?
no. No, because we're not, of course, the park is not developed, and so. But I just wanted to show you that roughly what we anticipate it might cost to run the park.
One other question I have for you, Mark, was, can you give us a broad overview again, that if we sell tax forfeited land, what the revenue could be used for or where it goes?
If you sell tax forfeited land, the money goes into the tax forfeited account and at the end of the year gets portioned out the way it normally does. We've tried to get some special legislation that allows us to keep some of that revenue. And the thing is that at the end of the year, what you haven't spent has to be apportioned out. And so if you can't buy and sell, or sell and buy, in the same year, then that money gets distributed to the townships, the school districts, and the county general fund. So, it can be used for acquisition, of lands that you want to, acquire. But you have to do it in the same year that you sell the property, so.
So could the county share of the revenue be used for demolition?
No, because the property, the Deep Lake Park property is not tax forfeited land. If it forfeited, yeah, then you could. Now, if you want to do a land exchange, you could make it tax forfeited if you exchanged Deep Lake Park property, but I think that would kind of go against the deed restrictions and the acquisition process for that, so it would be awfully complicated. But, yeah, unfortunately, there's no way of using any of those natural resource funds, the forced development or the in lieu or any of those things for that property because it's not forfeited property.
I was wondering about that because doesn't a certain percent of that money can go to the Parks and Rec? And then this is Deep Lake is part of Parks and Rec?
Yes, the 20% goes to the Parks Department. That's that $170,000 that's in the park revenue line item. But that's the maximum that we can apportion to the recreation account. By statute, we can only do 20%.
So if you wanted to offset the demo cost, you would have to sell almost $1 million worth of tax forfeited land.
Right.
It wouldn't take much now.
I mean, you certainly may be able to offset some of that expense by selling some tax forfeited land and then that stays in the Parks and Rec account, which just kind of
Nice chunk of
use
land.
that to help balance the budget where you want it to be.
Right.
Nice chunk of land near Shallow Lake there that can, and Deer Lake.
Yeah, sure.
Couple $100,000 just out of that maybe.
Yeah, you can do it that way. The only thing is that you're only getting 20%, whereas if we got that legislation,
Right.
of course, that wouldn't work for the apportionment part though,
Right.
because that would be used for acquisition of other lands, not for demo and cleanup, so.
That would be a thought to consider and explore if there's some tax forfeited land that, we could sell and do
Yes.
that trade-off so we could get that demo done without impacting the budget.
And even though we can only use 20%, we're still putting the land back on the tax rolls.
And then and you're saying then the school districts and the general fund and that would also get a portion of that dollars.
Right.
So I mean.
Yeah, so it's being used
Yeah, a lot
well.
of people would benefit.
Yes.
And you've already kind of located some tax forfeited parcels that could be sold?
Yep.
Okay.
How long a process is that if you choose to do it?
Well, it would take most of a year. I mean, if we started now, we could do it probably midsummer next year.
Yeah. So I think that's an important budget consideration, that if we choose to
Yep.
do something like that as part of our budgetary planning, then he can get that in place so it happens next year.
Anything about tilt payments, that possibility of those increasing?
Well, there was.
Yes,
The
so it's a
legislative session ended with a fizzle this year. there was a proposal to increase the county's portion of PILT dollars from $2 an acre to $3 an acre. And that, you know, with the legislative session ending with no agreement on just about anything, I would assume that that is probably going to be brought up again next year. And hopefully, it seemed that there was relatively good support for that. It's just that it got, you know, tied up in everything else that there couldn't be agreement on. So, if they ever, legislation ever gets, in gear and gets something done, then, a good chance that that may happen, so,
It has moved up the list on AMC's priority.
yeah. There was also some legislation that AMC was pushing was blight cleanup, in that the county boards could apportion up to 100% of the net proceeds of the tax forfeited account to blight cleanup. And that's more for counties that don't have large amounts of tax forfeited lands, but do have cleanup issues. And, you know, you get down into Hennepin and Ramsey and those counties, they don't have, they have a lot of tax forfeited lands, but it's, you know, vacant buildings and those kind of things, so they have a lot of cleanup costs as well. And so, you know, if they could apportion everything that they get from sale of tax forfeited lands, or the net proceeds from those tax forfeited lands, and use that for cleanup, that's what they're looking at. You know, I don't think Hubbard County would want to take our $1 million of timber revenues and put it towards cleanup, and then not apportion anything to the school districts and the township, so. But just be aware that that is out there. It was a county board option, and they could set that percentage wherever they wanted it. So if at some point in time the county wanted to say that we want a special fund set aside for blight cleanup of tax forfeited lands, we could do that. But again, that didn't pass either, so. But it's out there, and it's a possibility. Anything else?
Were we gonna discuss the private easement policy?
Do you wanna do that now, or do you wanna have the BSO?
I was gonna say, maybe Jerry go first.
You can, however you wanna work it.
You got Chip up here, just keep rolling.
Okay, all right. So we have been working on updating our easement policy for private easements on tax forfeited land. And one of the problems that we have been running into is that every time somebody needs an easement for access to their property, it is typically when they're in the process of selling their property. And the owners don't want to have to get an easement just to sell their property and then turn around and have the new owners have to come back and request a transfer of the easement, because that's our current policy, and that the easements do not transfer with the sale of property. And it has been a bit of a problem. Mortgage companies do not like to issue a mortgage and not know whether that easement is going to transfer or not. And we've kind of gotten around it in that we issue an easement to be effective based on closing, and so it somewhat works, but it's been a little bit cumbersome. So what we have tried to do is change the easement policy that would allow easements to transfer with the sale of properties, with the caveat that as long as the landowners are following all federal, state, local zoning ordinances, regulations, laws, rules, whatever, there's no problem. But the county board would have the option to revoke an easement if there is a violation, significant violation of, say, the zoning ordinance. That would, allow the county board to keep control of these properties, of the easements, and still allow the transfers without the convoluted process of having to come back for a transfer request. One of the issues that we've got in there is in our original policy, it says that the request for easements will not be considered for private parcels that are being considered for a plat. Again, that, and that was put in there because, the easements, the legislation that allows the counties to grant easements says that there cannot be any significant adverse environmental impacts. And when we grant an easement, and we don't know how many lots there are gonna be out there, what kind of environmental impact we're gonna have in there. That's why that statement was put in there. Maybe that doesn't apply, maybe that's something that could be taken out or should be taken out, I don't know. Maybe it should be left in there, again, not sure.
I was,
Oh,
Go ahead.
did you reach out to either Jonathan or else Eric and ESO about that statement?
We have, this has been through Jonathan, and he's approved it the way it is.
Did you talk to Eric to see his opinion on it?
I can send it through Eric and see what he thinks of it as well. I don't know if I can't say that we've ever had a request for an easement for a parcel that's proposed to be platted. Most of our easements are more for remote parcels, but sometimes they're not, so.
Having sat through a conversation with Chip and Jonathan about this, the more practical way is to have the easement be assigned to the parcel, not to the owner, which is what this change is relative to. And in the application, they talk about use. So I don't know that this not be considered for being considered for a plat, because that would be determined in the application when they're talking about the use, so it would be considered at the point of application. So I don't think it needs to be here, because the vetting will happen during the application process. And if it's for a plat and the easement actually turns into a road because of how many parcels it ends up serving, well, that is a different review process than this would be. So I don't think this needs to be here, because use is one of the criteria on the application. Change in use is one of the reasons that the county would have the ability to revoke the easement.
yeah, that's what I was kinda thinking is,
So
like you
that
say,
would-
the original easement might be for somebody's 40-acre parcel, and they have to go through tax forfeit land to get there, but then after a period of years, they decide to lot that all off. Well, then now, like you say, that easement that was granted isn't just for.
They'd have to go through a different process. That easement would not serve the new use.
So
And
it- that would-
Another thing that we do have in here is that we would review all parcels owned by the applicant within the county to make sure that their property taxes are current. Just another way of making sure that, we're not issuing an easement to a parcel and while they're letting something else go forfeit. It's just a way of just ensuring that they're paying their property taxes. That basically is the bulk of the changes on the easement for private easement. So So if you have any other questions on that or whatever, I'd like to bring this forward. I currently have 3 easements, kind of waiting to, for this, policy to be updated so we can move forward on these 3 easements.
So can we perceive anything, you know, it says here, as far as granting it, that the easement will not cause significant adverse environmental or natural resource management impacts. And you
Right.
grant the easement, is there any potential that that could change over time that wouldn't be covered under a change in use?
Honestly, I think the change in use is the legal review option that we have, and I think that that would cover us. I can't come up with a situation
Yeah.
where we're gonna have an increase in volume that isn't associated with the change in use. An increase in the types of vehicles accessing the property that wouldn't also, you know, go along with the change in use. So I think that's the trigger that we still have available to this. If we review recent situations with private easements, the change in use would have triggered a review, or the possibility of a revocation in any one of those cases.
And the original easement would still come before the board.
Is that the process? It'd come to the board or be brought before NRM? The original, the approval process is still NRM brings it to the board when the application,
Yes.
yep.
Yep.
And then, as in every case, when we have a shoreline violation, if we have an easement violation, if we have anything like that, then that is documented, it's shared with you the same way as a violation in ESO, and then if action is needed, then it will be brought before the board. We wouldn't be actively investigating every one of these. All of them would be on a reporting basis or a change in use basis, or if staff notices it, if neighbors notice it, then that's when we have an investigation to determine a violation.
So you're hoping to put this on the agenda as soon as possible?
Yep, for the next meeting, 16th. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Jerry.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. When we're looking and comparing fiscal year '22 to
Wait,
fiscal...
we need to know what page to turn to.
Number 29.
Okay, ready? Okay. Comparing '22 to '23, there really isn't any big difference in my budget at a couple $100. With the exception of salaries, the largest apportionment of my budget is travel and meals. That has to do with outreach and also for training. Some examples of what we use our funds for with the PACT Act. We've had significant training on that and opportunities to go to other locations to make sure that we're trained and up to speed on the different changes that legislation brings to us. So I think it's very important that we do have those funds available to travel and for training. If you take a look at comparing 21 to 22, fiscal year 21, I didn't spend all those funds. I was about $3,000 or $4,000 short. I was very optimistic in our ability to have in-person training, and I continue to be optimistic to do that. If you take a look at fiscal year 22, I had $6,600 budgeted for travel, and I've spent about $300 of that so far. I anticipate that I'll continue to spend some of those funds, but I may not. So when it comes to travel, my approximately $6,000, I hope to spend it all, but I may not. Years past, we talked about possibly getting a vehicle to maybe offset some of the costs of this travel, but because of the unknown and sometimes I just may not use those funds, I don't think it'd be cost effective to do that, so I'd continue to like to use those funds for transportation and move forward with that. Other things, I do have a $10,000 grant that I'm going to be applying for. I believe I'm going to get on the agenda next week to request those funds. I use most of those funds for, again, travel, veterans events, outreach. With our new hire, I anticipate buying a couple of new computers to assist us in working remotely when we are on travel. And Aaron has actually done some house visits, so I think that's important too, to make sure you can bring those electronics with you when you do that. We will continue to partner with other service organizations to perform outreach. Some examples, we partnered with the Disabled American Veterans to put on some events. We will partner with the American Legion to have Coffee with Vets, I think August 20th. So they continue to support us as well, to no expense to the county. So I think we're doing a pretty good job being fiscally responsible to make sure that we appropriately spend those funds that the county trusts us to do so. You have any other questions?
Keep it up.
Yeah. Pretty simple.
I try to keep it simple. All right, thank you for the time.
So where do we go from here, Jeff?
Now we go through some of the major assumptions and that went into preparing the budget, and then let you guys ask questions about that, and then we'll review what the summary budget looks like, and then kind of talk through our plan to get to where we need to be. So, if you would go to the first page in your book. On the first page, you'll see a schedule. You'll note that next week, we're gonna have social services and public safety. We can't get everybody in on a work session because we only have two. And these are the dates that work for Corey and Brian and Nancy to come and present their budgets. So I've scheduled social services, public safety, solid waste, road and bridge as the primary budgets with all the big moving pieces. My first question would be, are there any other department heads or departments that you'd like to see? Hold that question, and we can bring it up again at the end of this when you look through their budgets, or if anything comes up in reviewing them, and what you'd like, if you want to look at any more particular. We've made a number of changes in the way that we're budgeting this year. In previous years, we had a social services budget and a county budget, and we developed them separately, and then after they were approved in January, we combined them and talked through the process. There's no need to do that, so we're working in one budget at this point in time, which is much easier for me and much easier for you to see what the total, what's the bottom line, what are the expenditures and the revenues, et cetera. There are two things that are not included in this budget. And one is transit under social services, and the reason it's been excluded is because it has another source of revenue, right? I still think it should be shown in here, even if it doesn't show as a need for a use of levy. We should see the dollars, so we see the total budget that we're supporting. And then I think we should consider, and this one I have more questions than answers on. I think we should consider the net of operations of Heritage Campus, and showing that in our full budget, because there is a financial impact to that. And it is not considered in any of these summary responses. So I throw that out there. Putting transit in here really is kind of a push. It doesn't mean anything. It just, I think at the end of the day, when somebody asks what's the county budget, I think we should know that number. And we should easily find that from the bottom of the county-wide budget report. Those would be changes in operation. They require that we would do a little bit differently in our reporting. It really wouldn't change that much from what we're looking at today of the net of operations of county funds. But we're not taking into account at this point heritage funds. Second page is kind of an index of the first few handouts that are included with this. The levy summary, the fund balances, the proposed staffing changes, some financial assumptions. I guess I have them out of order here. General fund summary, an update on the enterprise leasing, where we're at based on, compared to what our proposal was a number of years ago, and then the entire budget report. But an important thing, and I guess I'm gonna take bullet point 4 first, the financial assumptions. The next page that you see, the budget is obviously based on many assumptions for future revenues and expenditures. The current proposed budget, what you're seeing here, includes a proposed 3% COLA for wages. We're entering negotiations. We know there's some big balls in the air relative to negotiating cost of living. We know that there's an issue related to health insurance benefits changing. We know that we still want to propose an implementation of the next iteration of the classification scale. All of those things are not reflected in here, but the negotiating team and I will put some numbers to that. I'm not sure what that number is. We have our first meeting on Friday. I think we'll have a much better idea. We will have a better idea before we need to set a preliminary levy. Another assumption I'm making is that this is the budget we're working off of until we get direction. If we make corrections throughout, I don't want to make them to the budget. I want to hold them until we bring you the next budget and the preliminary levy for the board to approve in September. Because this is 100 pages and I don't want to reprint this over and over and over again. I just want to carry a list of the things that we're going to change. We'll change them in 4 weeks and then we'll print a new copy and then you'll be able to see that. Yeah.
I have a question about this 3% COLA assumption increase. The only one that I've looked at so far is the one we just had, the Veterans Service, and that one only shows like 1% or maybe a little less than 1%. So are all the others like that, or?
No, and the reason that looks different is because we have a new person in that assistant VSO position, and they're making less than the person was previously.
Oh, okay.
So it's 3% to the range, but if we have, especially when you only have 2 people in the office, if one person comes in and they're making less than the other one, it reflects, it skews that differently. The 3% COLA then obviously affects all the taxes on the wages. The benefits we plugged in and we left them right where they were because we know we have some cost savings. So we think we left a little buffer in the benefits line. But that's a good question. And I will make time available to walk through every line item with anybody that wants to. Or like I said, if we want to go through department by department like we did with parks, we certainly can. Human resources put together all of the numbers for all of the estimates for all the staff. It included the current staff and the proposed new staff. So we're gonna have a conversation about that too. So the proposed new staff are all included in this preliminary budget. And that includes the new dispatcher jailers that we added earlier this year would be new on the budget in 2023. They're new to the operating budget for this year, but they were not included in last year's initial budget.
Jeff, I think it was you that gave us, like in 2017, we had X amount of employees, and then, could you dig that out for us again?
I did. I just sent a note to Gina and Jane, and I said we need to sit down and review that, and I want to put that in here too. So as soon as we update that and show what the actual 2023 proposed is, I'll get that out to you as well.
Thank you.
Because that's a one-page summary that I really like to work from.
Because that's an ongoing expense. Whatever we add is an ongoing expense.
And one of the assumptions or observations that I've made and assumptions that I carry forward in budgeting is our levy has to support our compensation budget, right? So if we've got an increase of 3% on our cost of living, we need 3% minimum on our levy, and then we have to look at operating, right? So those are some major assumptions. Moving on to tax capacity. The market changes to residential properties yielded a 27.5% tax capacity increase for the county. That is manufactured, that's not real, right? That's a market adjustment. Normally, we would like to capture new tax capacity. So whatever, if you have a 3% growth in new construction, you can have a 3% levy increase, and it's not gonna affect anybody, it'll just affect the new growth. It's gonna be different this year. But one of the other things is now we've calculated the impact of Enbridge. There's a 10 or 11% contribution of new net tax capacity from Enbridge this year, and about 1% to 2% of new construction overall. It's actually down, as Chip said about housing starts. I think that had an impact on that. But when I shared that number with Bruce Kimmel from Ellers, he had to wait for an hour, and then he called me back and he said, I really had to process that and double check your numbers, because a 40% increase in tax capacity is unheard of. Well, it's not. In all of the regional counties, Cass, Itasca, Crow Wing, they're all seeing 25 to 30% tax capacity increase from market adjustments. And Hubbard and Aiken are seeing the 10 or 11% increase from Enbridge. So I was just on the phone with Jessica Seibert yesterday and going through that, and their numbers are very similar to ours as far as how much. I think they're seeing $238 million of estimated market value, and we're showing $288 million of estimated market value, and that's a big number.
Yeah, it is a big number, and already the realtors are saying prices have dropped. So
Mhm.
it's gonna be interesting. We can't.
We cannot count on the 27. Absolutely, we cannot. But we should count on the 10 or 12 of new value, and you'll see how that factors in. So we are calculating to levy. So we've changed we know what people have put in for expenditures, and so we put the expenditure line in. We put in all the other revenues, the revenues from sources other than levy, and then we calculate to levy. What do we need in levy to balance that? Now, that's overcarrying because I'm not considering the use of fund balance to mitigate some levy. I'm also showing a place marker for capturing that 10% from Enbridge, and haven't allocated it yet. I'm just showing it. When we get to the summary sheet, you'll see where that is. General fund and public safety increases fall primarily into additional staffing costs. And we made some really significant changes in how we're reporting expenditures, budgeting expenditures and revenue and social services. You'll see that as well. I think we're budgeting much closer to zero. But it might be 2 or 3 year process to actually get there. The next page, kind of a summary of general fund department changes. You'll recall we already added 4 dispatcher jailers to 250. That's a cost of $282,000. We have additional staff, and we'll see a worksheet on that shows $539,000 worth of additional staff requested above those 4 jailers. And then I'm estimating that 3% COLA is about $525,000. So last year's levy increase was $500,000. It's not gonna go that far this year, given all of the preliminary assumptions. Capital needs, I wanna confirm this, but I believe that Scott put $400,000 in for a new dispatch console that we've been talking about. We had talked about covering that with ARPA grant. I know that was, and I think I'm calling it the right thing, but if I'm not, I know it's a big piece of technology that's overdue for replacement in law enforcement. Closing a section of the south landfill, estimating $900,000 to do that. I added to this list, Deep Lake Park planning, $300,000. Those are things we might consider using that first year capture from Enbridge to cover. And 400, 900, and 300 is coincidentally the $1.6 million and 10% that I calculated from Enbridge. And then one final thing, housekeeping thing, we combine maintenance 111 and 113 accounts. It's, in my mind, keeping two separate piles of money in your left and your right pocket doesn't mean anything if they're not affecting the revenues. So we've changed a lot of reporting, and we've reduced the number of splits in wages. We've reduced the splits in costs, unless there's a revenue source tied with it, or it's split across funds. So everything in '01, the general fund, 111 and 113 is all being done by Bobby and his staff, and we don't need to keep track of that. So you'll see, when you see 111, you're gonna see it went way up. Well, then you have to go look over in 113 and see it zeroed out. So the two combined are only modestly changed. Any questions to that point?
You know, you talk about like closing the section of the south landfill, and isn't a lot of that covered by grant money? Really? No.
No.
And we won't incur all that in 1 year.
That's actually proposed 1 year
Wow.
for 25% coverage, I think is the number. But Josh will speak to that specifically when we bring him in. We're gonna be looking at either a modest increase to solid waste fees because of the additional costs that we're gonna have. He'll be talking about that. Or we have the possibility of biting off a one-time big chunk to plan for the next 5 or 8 years worth of additional capital costs. We may be able to fund this year. But if that only closes a quarter of it and we got 6 years left on that lease or on the permit, we're gonna have to close the balance of it. We're gonna have some additional costs. So in one way, we need like a 10% increase in our solid waste fees in order to carry the additional operating costs, which I think everybody understands with inflation doesn't seem so out of line. If we had a 50% increase, we would be able to carry the capital cost too. And that's a huge number. 50% is a big number, but going from 158 to 225 on a residential apportionment is $1.50 a week. So policy options from 0 to 50%, I think, are what we're gonna have to have a conversation about with that, and we'll have to look at some of the other assumptions. We could always continue, if we capture the Enbridge capacity, we could allocate that to that, but I think we'd rather spend it on economic development and other capital than on capital costs that actually are for a specific purpose.
See, I look at some of this capital needs and stuff. The near-term capital needs, that would be the purpose of capturing some of that Enbridge money to take care of that. So that would come out of, the operating budget and just go to capital. That's kind of the purpose, would be the purpose of doing that.
And I think that's entirely true. We talked about funding the infrastructure for a housing project, too, out of economic development dollars, and we wouldn't be able to do both if we were fighting with that. So there's a balance on all of those things, but I think it really solidly enhances the policy option to capture that 10% from Enbridge on 16 million would be $1.6 million. That is there going forward to do this year's capital projects, next year's capital projects, and then plan for future bigger capital projects when we would.
But even then, the operating budget needs a lot of work.
Yes, you will see that. We have to address the operating. We can't address the operating budget with Enbridge. Here's just a quick update of an email that I got from Dominic Benjamin that just simply says that we anticipated savings of $62,000 a year over the first 5 years of that enterprise lease. And even with the increased costs in fuel and maintenance, we're still seeing 2/3 of that. So this past 12-month spend, we're still showing a $39,000 savings over what the estimate would have been for the 5-year plan of investment of that. So we still are on track to be spending less than we were budgeted to spend if we hadn't made the decision in the first place. And we're driving new vehicles. We're doing much more preventative maintenance, a lot less long-term maintenance. Those savings should carry forward. This next page is just a really quick look, haven't had a chance to double check these numbers. I just ran them from our cash trial balance report. So our general fund is showing about a 75% fund balance. Road and Bridge, you really can't tell because their trial balance goes all over, you know, they carry money from one year to the next. Human Services, I believe that number is actually a little bit higher, but it's just over 50%. I got the new report from Nancy, and it showed, I think, 4.7 million instead of 4.2. But it depends on which of the departments they're including in that. And Solid Waste is showing about a 50%. Tax forfeited land is carrying that money that Mark Chip talked about. And we currently, I can't even remember, did we adjust the fund balance policy last year? Or did we just talk about
I was
it?
just wondering about that myself.
We're gonna check the records and see if we actually modified that or if we needed to, because our current, the stated policy that, that Kay refers to and has in her worksheets is 30 to 50%. But I think we all know that it needs to be 5/12, so it needs to be 42%. And because we're in good shape, I really think we should set it at 50 to 75% to give us some flexibility. It also allows us to budget much closer in social services. Again, if we have an out-of-home placement and have to spend $500,000, we can do that without having to budget for it every year, right? We can trim down to what we think our real needs are and then do that. So I just share that as a general piece of information because the first thing we're gonna do when we turn the next page is say, well, that's not gonna work. So the next page you have, which one is it? Is the, okay. Is the summary report. And again, we changed it a little bit. You can see the 21 and 22 previous summaries. These were the summaries at the approval, time of approval. And I went and included a breakdown in general fund and broke out public safety because I think you really need to see where a lot of our money is going to and a lot of our increases are coming from. I have another report I'm gonna share with you after this, but I include a few more detail on it. Expenditures in general fund are 12% increase. Expenditures in public safety are showing at a 20% increase. That is the $400,000 shown for that piece, that console. They're showing additional costs for medical supplies and food service in the jail, and then they're showing nearly $500,000 in new wages next year. They're also showing a decrease in revenues of 13%, and that is primarily from the housing of inmates, right? If we're housing all of our own, we don't have room to take on other people. And so there's a reduction in $150,000 in revenue expectation there. Highway Department, like I said, balances out with the funding that they have available. You see that social services number, that expenditure line is a 3% decrease from last year's expenditure line because I've asked them to budget closer, and their revenues are up 5% from last year. Now, I'm showing the net of those two numbers as the levy. And you'll look down below and you'll see last year we had a use of fund balance against that. I think there's an amount of that that's reasonable, but I also think that we've cut out a bunch of the wiggle room that we used to have. We budgeted to use $1.5 million in fund balance and actually return fund balance to the operation. That wasn't budgeted close enough. This year it's gonna be closer, so I don't know what's reasonable to put in there, but we'll have that conversation as we go along. Solid waste, you can show, I'm showing their need for a use of fund balance of $974,000, $900 for capital, $74 for operating. And we'll have to talk about that because we don't support from levy. So it's either from fees or they use from their fund balance. Natural resource management is showing, you saw Chip's review today, they're actually showing a return of 10%. And then under capital reserves, I am showing $1.6 million in use of fund balance, along with $1.6 million in levy capture. And as Commissioner De La Hunt mentioned, if we allocate $400,000 up to offset expense in public safety to buy that console down, we would move $400,000 up to the public safety line to offset that expense. And that would reduce the levy needed to carry the public safety budget. And likewise with NRM, with parks under general fund, and/or however else you wanted to allocate that money in the first year.
And the 1.6 for capital, and then the fund balance, what were you gonna use that for?
So that's what I'm saying is I'm showing capturing 10% of this current year's
Yep.
levy
Yep.
for future use in capital or economic
Okay, so you're
development.
just putting it in there.
So I'm just showing it as a placeholder.
Yep,
You can allocate that up to any one of these funds against any one of those projects, and
Okay.
it will just reduce the levy that's needed in those amounts,
got it, thank you.
right? So I know we have some discovery to do. I know we need to work on bringing the operating budget down. I know we need to have a conversation about the balance of the positions that are being requested. This is not the starting place. This is simply the raw data.
Right.
I would hope that over the next week, even at next week's meeting, after we talk with Corey and after we talk with Brian, I would think we would have an ability to show some of this. I've got a list of questions straight from the detail that I'm gonna go through with the individual department heads and try to make some modifications. Some places where we got placeholders for this project or that project or this project. If we eliminate all of those placeholders in lieu of capturing that new Enbridge tax capacity, then we can reduce that.
Right now, you're at 36% increase.
No, we're not. Yes, we are, but no, that's,
It's not gonna happen.
That ain't gonna fly, yeah.
yeah, no, I completely and totally get that. I think that if we consider 12% being the stuff we can capture because it's new, and because of the cost of increasing in labor, and depending on how many positions of the new ones that you feel are justified, we're gonna need 6 or 8 more.
So when I'm thinking about the growth in our county as far as people we're serving,
Yep.
and then I'm thinking about the continual adding of staff, have regulations changed?
No, but caseloads have.
Okay, but if you take social services out of the mix,
Mm-hmm.
and you take public safety out, then there's not a lot of,
There's not a lot of adjustment in those, that's where the movement is in staffing.
yeah,
Yep.
there's not a lot of increase in the other departments.
And that truly really is relative, I mean, subject to ratios and subject to Corey's estimation of what they need for holding forth and the additional deputies. And I still want to take some look at this between the balance between the full-time and the part-time that he's got budgeted, because there might be a little bit of slack in there. So it's not, it's a starting place. What I wanted you to see was I wanted you to see the raw numbers. Those raw numbers are not gonna go, I mean, now they're out, but that's not what's gonna happen.
Thanks.
I think the same way on employees, you know, it's like, we're looking at, from 4 years ago when we started, looking at a 25% increase in employees, and I don't think our Hubbard County's population has increased.
No.
But that's simple math, but that doesn't get down to why we've got an ask for more employees at social services and at the sheriff's department.
So on the next page, past the summary, you have a summary of the new positions requested. And on face value, every single one of them makes sense. But again, that doesn't jive with what the hard numbers look like.
I could, if you would like for me to tear apart one,
Feel free.
okay. The land commissioner one. When you go to interview a new land commissioner, you're going to be looking for experience. So someone who isn't going to need 6 months overlap with the previous one, maybe a few weeks, a month tops, not 6 months. The other aspect of that is, I think Chip said he'd like to work with more on Deep Lake. Well, next year is going to be primarily demoing year. But what's the land commissioner needed for that? So that's just tearing apart one of these requests.
And those are fair questions.
The same thought.
Actually, I did too, Tom.
Okay.
So the first one on this is an additional legal secretary in the attorney's office. I think everybody's kind of aware of the caseload that they've been dealing with. The sheriff has asked for another patrol sergeant. When we bring his review in next week, we'll bring in the existing and the proposed org chart. Do we have those? Okay. We know we've added the dispatcher jailers. The initial social services request for 7 new employees has been brought down to 3 before it even made it to here, before it's even calculated in that preliminary budget, because we've done what we could internally to rearrange. So the 2 new are a social worker in adult services, a child support officer, and a collections officer or case aide within the department. One of those 2 would be filled by somebody who's currently in another position. So we would have a net of 3 add. It'd actually be 4 new and reducing by 1.
Yeah, because I would ask a question on all of these is, number one, you're gonna have to sell why you actually need it this year.
Mm-hmm.
Better be pretty compelling based on the numbers we're looking at, and if it can't be, if it can be put off for another year, I don't know how we do anything, think any differently.
Majority of them completed the identifying staff needs that I pushed Jeff, but if we need to, have to push those out to you to justify that.
Yeah, and I get that, but that doesn't mean you absolutely necessarily have to have it.
There's a challenge with the proposed new staff in social services. We're also showing that proposed increase in revenues. Specifically, 2 of these new positions are tied to additional revenues, right? So if we eliminate those, we don't save all of that, we save that less the revenues we anticipate that they would be able to capture. And I can't speak to that number specifically, but I know that we will be able to next week.
The problem with that,
Mhm.
because I see this because of the committee I'm on at AMC, and that you guys already know this. There is no end in sight to spending, and so even though if we could get revenue coming in, the taxpayer is still paying. They're just not paying at the county level, they're paying at the state or the federal level.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely true. But the proposed 5% increase in revenue is some adjustment on revenue overall, but some of it includes the time study that we would get from, I think, 2, if not 3 of those positions would be reimbursement eligible for a portion of their time. And I'm just sharing that. Brian will bring those details when he talks next week.
And the hard reality is, the different constituents I talk about, they're all about public safety until you tell them what it costs. Because it costs money.
If we look at a place that's grown faster than anything, it's 201 sheriff and 250 jail.
Mhm.
The costs are just,
So when the residents decide what they wanna do, then they need to be there's many articles out about cities and states which have lessened their fund, maintain or more, they need to decide where they fall in that.
The problem is with what's going on in the world now, these are needs that need to be filled. But when you look at the budget, you ask the question, do I have to do it now? I mean, can I do some of it now, some of it the next year, and some of it the next year, instead of all right now? Because
Yep.
our budget numbers don't support doing it all right now, no way.
No, everything's hitting at the same time.
So that's the question for the department heads. It's like, you really have to think about what do you really absolutely need and what can be put off till another year or two.
And you know, 200 and, well, close to 300 that we've already approved.
Mm-hmm. The jail thing was that you had to do it now.
Yeah.
The inmates are there. You don't have a choice.
It's either that or ship them out, which would be the same cost.
Well, what else are you gonna do?
It actually would probably, it would be more to ship them out.
That's why you can see someone letting them out.
So we have a lot of hard work to do with this, and there are a lot of moving pieces. If, what I have on my sheet is trying to get this to under 20, because then that would be a 6 or 7% hit to the existing tax base, and the balance of it would be carried by the new tax base. And I think if we can get to there before, in time for our September, then we can refine assumptions. I know that's still a difficult conversation to have, but that is still falling in line with Enbridge saying, we're gonna create jobs and then we're gonna pay taxes. This is the way that we collect those taxes from Enbridge, at this point in time. The next sheet, you have the general fund breakdown. So here I just broke out, the totals really don't mean much, but if you look across the line at the commissioners, we have a decrease of levy need of 4%. District court costs are going up 26%, but that's a big number that really doesn't mean anything because it's only $29,000. You can see line by line on here. What I would point out is the one that recorder says 137% increase. There was an error on last year's budget that was finalized and approved, and not all of the labor for the force staff in that office were calculated in their budget. We're just fixing that. Their costs are not going up by 137%.
Where's that one?
The recorders, 101. When you look all the way across to the right-hand side, you see an increase of 137% that's not real. There was a mistake made in the final budget last year.
How did you come up with 47% for building maintenance?
Okay, that is number 11.
Yep.
So you see a 47% increase there,
Oh,
and
and
then
that's
right
what you were
below, you
talking
see
about, a zero.
you see
Yep.
the 100%
Yep,
decrease.
okay.
So if you add those two lines together and you look, you'll see there's a net of about 10 or 15%, which is mostly fuel cost. And then you drop below that, and then I've itemized the public safety, the 200 department codes in general fund. And you can see on the left-hand box, it's the expenditures, and the right hand, or in the middle, it's the revenues, and on the left hand, it's the levy. And the increase or decrease in the amount of levy is significant. So I'm just breaking out what I showed in the summary in a little more detail in the general accounts. But that's $1.5 million to support public safety of new levy dollars.
So the alternative is less arrests or letting people out early, or what's?
I don't really know, and I don't really want to have that conversation until Corey's here, but he'll be here next week, and we'll have to, so in the sheriff line item, that 720, 400 is for that dispatch console. That's a completely reasonable thing to use one-time funds for, so that reduces that down to 1.1 million. If we look at some of the other assumptions, there may be some other things we can reduce in that are one-time costs. But I think if we make a mistake, if we throw that those new revenues against operating costs. I plan to share with you my levy summary that has my initial target on it and shows the work that we have to do to get there. And then show the running worksheet between now and the middle of September of what we've done to get to that preliminary target. And then we have to refine from there. But like I said, I've got a whole page of questions and adjustments. I found one that I have to verify with Gina that almost looks like an extra keystroke at one point. If that one goes away, it's a big number. But that's how we got here. That's the work that we did to get here, and that's the work before us. In my mind, I've got to shave $1.6 million off the operating budget to even make this reasonable. And/or you have to say it's necessary, and then we just change the mark. But that's a very difficult conversation.
Or I've only had one resident call me and talk to me about the levy, and he felt that there was gonna be a big increase this year. I told him it's a possibility, but that, we're trying to capture some of the Enbridge stuff, so that would help reduce it, but it's still gonna look like a big number when we first comes out.
Even at that mark, our tax rate's gonna go down 5% or more. So there's the silver lining, is the tax rate's gonna go down. Again, some of that is math and inflation and those market adjustments as well. We've been running, I've been running scenarios and working it through with different administrators. If somebody had a $400,000 house and now they have a $600,000 house, and their taxes at a tax rate of 39% or this, and their taxes at a tax rate of 34% or this, it's still an increase, right? It's gonna be an increase no matter what we do with the levy, because their share of the housing market has increased by that amount, and their share of the burden of the tax capacity for the county has shifted to residential from other areas.
I do believe too that we would be somewhat foolish to use that Enbridge tax capacity money just to artificially keep the levy low for,
Right, cause we're not being real.
because we are gonna hurt ourselves in the future if we do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we have to look at it as two separate things that come together in the end. We have to look at the operating budget, and we have to set our levy on that, and then work with the Enbridge
I think
as an additive.
I think we can use it to buy down current capital needs, and that
Yes.
makes all the sense in the world. Use it as one-time expenditures. But if you allocate it towards operating costs, you're just kicking that can down the road.
Right.
So adjust the operating budget to what we can support now, and don't let it grow beyond what we can support. And that's gonna be tough with the
'Cause
asks.
you may feel good about it for a year or two, but 5 years from now, you'll wish the heck you'd never done it that way.
Yeah. So I go back to some of the preliminary assumptions. I think it makes sense to show transit on here. I mean, now we're a $52 million budget, and then we throw transit on here, and then we show the net of operations from Heritage, and it gets to be a big number. But I think we should show it all, because this board is responsible for all that money in and out. The transit doesn't have any impact on levy. That's a net zero. That's fine. But obviously, Heritage does and will.
Good, yeah.
Does and could,
will.
yep. So, I have a phone call as by way of an update with the broker this afternoon, and I hope to have him on the line for us next week. So, if you have questions, after this meeting, I'd really like to talk to the negotiating team about a couple of items. But if anybody else wants to sit and look through this, or wants to take their book home and look through it and then schedule some time to come in, I'd be happy to sit down and review these things.
Have to go home, and do some homework.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
It's a lot to bite off, and it's the first time you're seeing that 100-page report, and I want you to, my goal was to, I would've gotten it to you last week, but we didn't have some of the assumptions in. And I wanted it to be as high as possible so that the only thing it can do is come down.
And I have written on some of this.
Okay. Keep your notes. I hope to have some conversations about this. But otherwise, next week, I think, like I said, I've got my list of priorities to work down, and I'm gonna chip away at some of those things. If it makes sense, I might also make some assumption, if we capture that 10% for Enbridge, I might allocate that just to show how that affects the levy need, just so you can see that. I think it'll go a long way if we plan on capturing it next year, spending it on one-time needs, and then capturing it the second year and doing the same.
So we had 4.2 million in ARPA funds total, right?
Yes.
And we've given Heritage 1.5? We've
I thought
given,
it might have been 2.
is it 2?
I think it's
Was it
2, and we have not given any more.
Yeah, okay.
So, yes, we have that conversation yet.
But they're not in the black, so.
They're not in the black. I've been double checking these numbers because I didn't want to share them with you either, but next week when I share them with you and you see how much they've improved, then we'll give you a
Secret surprises in there waiting.
Well, when you do the, when we're ready to vote in September on the preliminary, would you be able to have some figures, estimates of what an individual taxpayer
Yes.
would pay more?
Yes. We will calculate calculate some tax impacts for you.
Yeah, I'd like to see some of those.
I ran
before
my
can
own.
give a
I ran my own
affirmative
today.
vote.
You know, and I ran that 400 to 600,000, which is kind of the max burn. That's a 50% increase, right? We didn't have too many that increased by more than 50%. But I ran mine too, and if you had a 50% increase I had a 40% increase in value, at those numbers, I would see a 25% increase in county share taxes, which would mean it would go from $763 to $1,000. But I have to show the net tax capacity and show the shift. So if that's all shifting to residential, you have to see that there's also gonna be a shift away. Commercial and industrial are gonna pay less. So we have some homework to do relative to net tax capacity and who's gonna pay what. And what portion of any levy we set is gonna be paid by which of those primary tax capacity groups. Because there is a shift this year.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
So move.
Second.
Thank you, Tom. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for all your work there.
Everybody put a lot into that this year. And Kay and her staff were doing it alongside with getting ready for a primary, so.
Off.
Hang on just a second, getting there.